one of the African literature, The Passport of Mallam Ilia by Cyprian Ekwensi. Prologue. Late in 1947, my train was gasping and panting up the steep incline that leads onto the Bauchi Plateau in northern Nigeria. It was a chilly morning. I had been traveling third class for 2 days and 2 sleepless nights with scarcely any room in which to stretch my legs. I felt bored to death and anxious to get the journey over. My companions were mostly Hausa men, Birons from the plateau, a few Yoruba traders who clattered up the train with their wares, and 1 or 2 schoolboys who sat at the front corner of the carriage, talking excitedly about their forthcoming holiday. In such mixed company, conversation was apt to be rather forced. Little remarks intended jocularly generally went wrong and got interpreted as insults. So I decided to hold my peace. But there was nothing I could do to relieve the boredom. I had read the novel and magazines I had brought with me. The scenery was too familiar to excite me, and my temper is not stand to be improved by any undue mental exertion. As I sat staring before me, the man seated opposite me did a most unexciting thing. He took out a bag from under his seat and pummeled me it, brought out a small flat blue book. He looked at it smilingly for a time and then put it back into the bag and continued to stare out of the carriage window. There was nothing unusual in this. The book was his, and presumably he had paid his fare, but my attention had been drawn to his face. At the first time since the journey had begun, I really noticed it. It was the face of an old man, bathed with weak eyes from with which the tears ran down freely. Even in a sitting posture, it was easy to see that he was very bent and that his limbs were shrunk. What struck me particularly was the man's uncleanliness. He was very dirty. His hands were cracked by the harmattan, that cold dry wind that crossed every lane between the Sahara and the Gulf of Guinea. His clothes were grey with dirt. His face looked unwashed, and yet that book he had glutted over was a passport. I wondered by what freak of circumstance such an insignificant-looking man could have come by an authority requesting all concerned, in the name of His Britannic Majesty, to allow my companion to pass freely and without let or hindrance, and to afford him every assistance of which he may stand on need. In my boyish imagination, a man who owns such a valuable document could not look like this. Why? It did not seem to me that he could even read or write down his own name. I was so intrigued by the situation that impulse suggested by asking him a question. I was still debating in my mind what course it take when someone interrupted me. "Hello, Hassan," he said, going to the land with the time mines. I looked up into the face of a dark complexioned man in a dirty brown coat. His face was familiar, but for the moment I was too irritated by his intrusion to recall his name. "I'm sorry," I said coldly. "I don't know you." He smiled rather shyly and went on to recount my past life. "Don't you remember how we used to play together at Jeba near Juju Rock? Don't you remember the day you left for college, how you were weeping for your mother? Captain Plowman, our education officer, pacified you and gave you 1 bright new shilling, don't you?" "I don't," I cut in, which was a lie. "Sorry then, I just thought if you were going to the mines, maybe you could help me land a job." I remembered him now. His name was Kofi. He used to tell us fantastic stories of the days when the first white man arrived. He couldn't be over 40 for his imagination so illuminated these stories that for us they became real. I had heard enough of these tales some 10 years ago and was in no mood now to recall them or to give an ear to fresh boasting. I ignored him and turned my thought again to the old man. I addressed him in Hausa with the respect his age demanded. Greetings, I said. I pray all is well with you on this journey. The Mallam, a man of some education and standing, looked up at me and his eyes widened with surprise, as if he were not quite certain whether after 2 days' silence he had actually heard me address him. I hesitated to reassure him by adding, I see that the Mallam has travelled far. It is even so, he admitted. His body was hoarse with cold and with disuse, and he wept freely. I have indeed travelled far. Mecca, I asked, recalling that the holy city was a favorite tourist spot. Yes, Mecca and beyond. He looked out of the window as if the interview gave him some pain, and for a moment I studied him silently. He was indeed travel-worn. His clothes were in tatters, and it must have been weeks since his beard had seen a razor. Even the small cap beneath his turban was visibly bright. Copy. Usman was striving to distract my attention with tales of his own misfortunes and asked me openly what chances he had of getting a job in the mines. I told him that was a question for the mining engineer and once again pressed the old man. What did you do in Mecca? I asked. I went to pay homage, he said. Yes, and beyond, I was with the army. Among other things, I was their doctor. You were an army doctor? He smiled toothlessly. I should have said a doctor of the mind as well as of the body, in our own little African way, of course. Understand, I said. They came to you with their problems, both mental and physical, and you advised them. A kind of medicine man, he explained. That passport I saw just now. Oh, that I got that in 1927. It is 20 years old now. Isn't it odd how time flies? Yes, I said. He nodded. 20 years, but Allah be praised. Those years were not wasted. I nearly missed him. Missed him? Who? He gave a guilty start and glanced about him. I begged for mercy, Mallam. I was really taken to myself. Would you like to see the passport? I was still rather puzzled. As I watched him bring it out and open it at the page containing the photograph, there was certainly no resemblance between him and the man in the photograph. Well, the one was young and virile, the other was old and decrepit. I saw before me a young man in his prime, his head crowned by a gleaming white turban, his shoulders draped in velvet, gone edged with gold embroidery. You have changed a lot, I remarked. 20 years is not a short time, he reminded me, but it was worth it. I didn't give my life for nothing. Give your life, did you say? What do you mean? My son, you are too curious. First, you want to see the passport, and now you must know what I am talking about. A student is naturally a curious man. I told him. Spare me the pen, he begged. My breath is poor. I cannot talk. He looked over his shoulder like a thief entering a strong room, and his voice sank low. Look at this, he said, and lifted his dirty robe. I nearly screamed at what I saw. Beneath his robe, just Under the hurt was a long deep flesh wound. It had stopped bleeding and the clothes had stuck and his clothes had stuck to its corners. The old man quickly covered up the wound and smiled thinly at me. I cannot talk much, you see, he panted. It will soon be over. I have also taken some of this. He shot me a white powder, just to make quite sure. I don't know what the English would call it, but when I was in charge of the army medical supplies, they told me that as much as will lie on a sixpence will kill a man in about 18 hours. He began to cough desperately. When he had regained control of himself, I asked him, "But why all this?" "Nothing," he said, shrugging his shoulders. "I just want to die." I was at a loss to know what could justify this double attempt at suicide. He was coughing again, and I looked at the passport. It described him as Mallam Alhaji Ibrahim Ilia, a man 5 feet 6 inches tall with no tribal marks on his face, a man born in 1882 and traveling to Mandara, Marua and Fort Lami for the purposes of trade. The passport was signed by the resident at Kano and dated May 1927. "I can't understand my reason for your action," I ventured. "No, you can't," he smiled. I wondered why I had not noticed before that I was sitting opposite a dying man, a man who for no apparent reason had taken it upon himself to bring about his own death. His eyes had grown more glassy since the beginning of our conversation. He was restless, yet too weak to move about. Now and again a violent cramp seized him in the arm or leg, and he cried out with pain. "You are a tough old man," I said. "You have been suffering quietly all this time, and toughness has its limit," he retorted. "I wish I could tell you my story. I feel you would understand. Don't try if the effort is too great, but if it will help you, it will. I must, he pleaded. There were times when he appeared quite normal, but his pulse was very low and his voice almost inaudible, so that often I had to guess and suggest and gesticulate before a nod of his grey head told me that I had got his meaning right. That was how we spent the few hours left between us and Jos. Towards the end, Mallam Ilia became very emotional, and I had to remind him that the time was short, and that if he excited himself unduly, he might never complete his tale. About 20 miles from Jos, he closed his eyes and invited me to go over the notes I had made on odd bits of paper so that he might be sure I had missed nothing. Below is what I recorded up to that time. The original was perhaps not quite as coherent as what follows, but the tale is, in essentials, what Mallam Ilia recounted to me, and I have as far as possible preserved his personal touch. For that grand old man was a great storyteller and a devout follower of the Prophet. Okay, see you in the next chapter. Thank you for listening and watching. The book name is The Passport of Mallam Ilia. Thank you. See you in chapter 1.